What an incredibly well-behaved group of people. This is amazing. I'm Susan Ness. I want to welcome everyone. I'm a board member of Vital Voices Global Partnership. Welcome to the building, which opened a little over a year ago, which we call the Global Embassy for Women's Leadership. So we're thrilled to have you all here today. We are streaming this. Otherwise, I would not be using a mic since it's such a good acoustic space. Our president, Elise Nelson, is so sorry that she could not be here. She's running one of our programs, which is in Nairobi, Kenya at this time, but she sends her warmest regards. Now, I hope if you've not had a chance to look at the building, that you do have a chance after the conversation to take a tour, to walk around a little bit. You'll see the birds, two-story soaring birds, and a number of pieces of artwork that you will recognize. This is a convening place for women's leadership. In fact, women's leadership, young and old, two of our floors for this week are occupied by young girls who are in a coding camp. So this just gives you a sense of how dynamic this place is. Now, as many of you know, Vital Voices invests in women who are taking on the world's greatest challenges. For more than 25 years, Vital Voices has been a venture catalyst, identifying those with a bold vision for change and partnering with them to make that vision a reality. We scale and accelerate their impact through long-term investments to expand their skills, connections, capacity, and visibility. And since its founding in 1997, Vital Voices Global Partnership has directly supported more than 20,000 women change makers in 185 countries around the world. And we've built a powerful global network of women leaders who are daring to reimagine a more equitable world for all. Speaking of partners, we could not have held this event this evening without our wonderful partners, the law firm of Hogan Lovells, represented by Michelle Farquhar, who's over there, thank you, and her partners, and the law firm of Wilkerson, Barker, and Nauer, which is represented by its partner, Evelyn Ramali, who is right over there. Thank you both very, very much for your participation. Now, we are especially thrilled to host the newly elected Secretary General of the ITU, the first woman ever to be elected to head the ITU in its 158-year history. Her election, needless to say, was historic. The ITU, which is, I think pretty much everybody here knows, is a specialized agency of the United Nations, has 193 members. These are member states, each with one vote. So it was exhilarating to see people worldwide rallying in support of her candidacy. I don't think we've ever heard of that for the ITU. This Secretary General has over 3 decades of experience leading global telecommunications policy. After other positions in the ITU in 2018, she was elected director of the Development Bureau. I think that also was breaking a glass ceiling as the first woman to win an election at the ITU. And I should add, she has local roots in the Washington, D.C. area. She is a graduate of American University, and she worked early in her career at the NTIA, which, as you all know, is part of the Department of Commerce. At the ITU, the Secretary General strongly promotes gender equality, meaningful connectivity, and sustainable digital transformation. she cajoles its 900 corporate members, and some of you are here and you know the cajoling, to meet the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Women's advancement, however, has always been a special passion of hers, and we'll hear more about that in a moment. So, in sum, we have today with us a thought leader with boundless energy who is working to transform the digital ecosystem for the good of humanity. So please join me in welcoming the Director General of the ITU, Doreen Bogdan-Martin. And we have a short video. If it's working. This building also has a tech twin. I would add it doesn't. I don't think the tech twin necessarily is here. One more second and we'll begin. Quite sure because it went quite quickly. I think you saw that she ran past a representation of breaking the glass ceiling. Did you catch that? That is sitting, I don't know if it still is sitting, it is, in the hallway of the ITU, just as a reminder to people of both what we've accomplished so far and what needs to be accomplished going forward. So, Doreen, the ITU has been referred to as the organization no one has ever heard of. What is, of course, this audience is different, but what is the ITU, very briefly? What does it do, and why is it so important?
Well, thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to be here and see so many friends in the crowd. This is such an inspiring, motivating workplace that you have, so really excited to be here. So the ITU is the oldest in the UN system, 1865, as you mentioned, and we're all about connecting. And when we started, it was about the telegraph way back then, and then of course we've evolved from the telegraph to the telephone, television, internet, and who knows for the future. But our main focus, of course, is connecting people, connecting communities, and ensuring that the benefits of connectivity can help empower people and communities. And when you have 2.7 billion people that have never, ever connected, we have a lot of work to do.
You've been at the ITU since 1993. Tell us about your journey getting there. Becoming the first woman Secretary General of the ITU. Did you encounter along the way any gender-related barriers or biases? And how did you overcome them? Because one of the things about this organization is leadership. So give us a sense of how you managed to do that.
Yeah, thank you. So it wasn't easy, but I think I was fortunate to have grown up in a very encouraging family, 3 brothers, I was the only girl, and my parents were very motivating in terms of things that I could do. So the sky was the limit. I started my studies in science, being the only girl practically in my chemistry classes. I later then shifted out of that because I was the only girl. But then when I went to American University, as you mentioned, and I got kind of excited about communications issues, in particular satellite communication issues, and I had a professor who introduced me to the then Assistant Secretary at NTIA, Janice Obachowski, and she offered me an internship. And I think I was so fortunate because then, and some of you were around then, there were many women working in telecom, many women at NTIA, many women at state, many women at the FCC. And so I didn't feel really many barriers, and I was encouraged, and many women mentored me. And then I went off to the ITU on a detachment back in 1993. It was for 3 months.
But who's counting?
It was 3 months, and then 3 months, and then 3 months, and then NTIA said, it's time to come back. So I went back to NTIA, and then I thought I'd like to give something a try in Geneva, and so I went back to the ITU and left the government. But in the ITU world, it was not the same as my experience in the government. And the ITU is very male-dominated, even still today, and definitely there were challenges, things that challenged me personally about being more assertive, taking the seat at the table, and I saw downstairs, if there's no seat, bring your folding chair. Some people say if you climb the ladder, make sure you leave it for the next one, or bring your own. So definitely there were challenges and obstacles and pushbacks, and even when I was encouraged to run for my previous position, and I had a lot of excitement from people in the government at the time, there were a number of men in Geneva that actually told me I shouldn't run because the ITU was not ready for a woman, and this was 2018. And it was very hard, and definitely there's a lot of bias that exists in our sector, and I think that we have to do more to help each other to make it a more encouraging field for women and girls.
Well, I think, of course, the ITU is in Geneva, Switzerland, and Switzerland itself did not have enable women to have the right to vote until, I think, 1972. But then they've had a woman president since then. Hello, United States. So how did you overcome these problems? What advice can you give to some of us who are still struggling to make the next rung of the ladder?
I mean, I think it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of resilience. It takes a lot of strength, and I think it's important to build a network, and it's important to be able to talk to people when you're feeling frustrated, when you're not feeling encouraged. And I think it's important to speak to men and women. I think that's the other point throughout my career. There are many men, including some sitting in this room, that have also been big mentors in my life. Teaching me things about new technologies, drawing on the blackboard, explaining different spectrum bands. And I think it's really important to just keep the network. And sometimes building a network and maintaining the network is not so easy, but having that kind of network of support around you is fundamental.
And one of the other attributes that we oftentimes talk about at Vital Voices is the nature of women's leadership, which tends to be collaborative as opposed to more hierarchical. Can you, it seems to ring a bell with you, can you talk a little bit about that? Because you certainly are known as someone who is extremely able to bring people together, particularly people who have very diverse viewpoints, to be able to accomplish a mission. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that's very true, and I do have a collaborative spirit and approach. which is very foreign to many, in particular in the UN system and in the ITU. And when I took up my previous function as director, the fact that I wanted to have people at the lowest professional grade and people at the highest professional grade, everyone being part of it. And I had a lot of pushback because people had been used to a sort of top-down and everybody has their roles. But I wanted to make people feel included. I wanted to listen to what people had to say. And I launched a process of change champions, which really helped me because change, and I know this is a big focus here at Vital Voices, change is never easy, and so you need to bring others around the table to make change advance, and that's something I'm currently doing in my new function. 7 months in, I launched a program to get change makers throughout the organization, men, women, all at different levels, to help drive forward some of the big reforms that we're in, I would say, desperate need of.
And in terms of any advice for the global tech community, how do we increase the representation of women within that area?
I mean, I think we have to do much, much more. Again, when I think back to my NTIA days, I almost feel like there were more women then than there are now. And so there's something wrong. And this year, the UN system, the Commission on the Status of Women, the theme this year was on women and innovation and science and technology, which was great that was the focus. I think let's say the regrettable part is that when you look at all of the statistics, we have not made progress. And when you look at the outcome, one would almost say that was the outcome that we asked for 25 years ago. And so if it's about bringing more women and girls into STEM, we all know that. We've been saying that for a long time. Bringing more women to the table, including women on your delegations. We try to do that. I mean, these are things that we know and that we've tried to do in ITU resolutions. 25 years ago, we had the first ITU resolution on gender. And today, when we look around, we have maybe 16, 17% of women ministers, about the same when it comes to regulators. The digital gender gap is not getting any smaller. So women are less connected, women have less access to devices. And of course, when we get them in the sector, there's this leaky pipeline syndrome that we don't seem to be able to tap. So I think it's an important moment where we need to rethink how we're addressing this, because we have to do something new. What we're doing is just not working.
You mentioned about connecting the unconnected, which is so important. Women in particular are a disproportionate percentage of the 2.7 billion people who are not connected at this point in time to the internet. And the disparity, not just in terms of getting that connection, but also using connectivity. Women are, as I understand it, much less likely to take advantage when they do have access to a cell phone, to take advantage of all that the internet and the cell phone can provide. Can you talk a little bit about that and what we need to do there?
No, absolutely, you're right. And if we look to least developed countries, it's like 1 in 5 women have access to the internet. Part of it is a cost issue. So, women are less likely to be able to afford the cost of service or the cost of the device. The other issue is linked to digital literacy. Women are less likely to have the needed digital skills to be able to leverage that connectivity. In many cases, the content might not be relevant or might not be in the language that would be needed. And I think the last issue is one of growing concern, which is that women often choose not to go online because of security-related issues. And so the increase in online harassment, in bullying, and of course this skyrocketed during the pandemic. And I think we also have to do much more on that space. I've had the opportunity to engage with a number of women leaders parliamentarians, in particular in Africa. Many of them were at the recent, the IGF at the end of last year, which was in Addis. And the stories that they tell as parliamentarians being online are dreadful. And I think there's a real push and a real need, because they need to be online for their constituent groups, but they are attacked, bullied, threatened, threats against their family. And it's a real issue that we have to find ways to make the internet safer, in particular for women.
That's absolutely right. So many legislators who are women leave their posts because of concerns about harassment. And we do need to find a way, civil society working together with companies, working together with governments to solve these problems or ameliorate the problems. One of the things about the ITU in particular is that it is an organization, while the voting is governmental, by governments, it does have a substantial base in multi-stakeholderism. Can you talk to us just a little bit about that and how that perhaps can be used to leverage to help women in a number of different ways?
So we're quite unique in the UN system, having the member state, 193 member states, but also having over 900 private sector companies, some are in the room, and also having academic institutions. We have more than 150 academic institutions, and we also have large civil society participation as well. And most of the meetings are almost, you could say, equal footing in terms of the constituent base and the membership. When it comes to voting, that's the right of the member states. But for the rest, the private sector, if they're part of the development sector, for example, they can make a contribution. They can take the microphone and they can actually have an impact on policy-related discussions or regulatory-related discussions. And I think that's something that needs to perhaps be better leveraged. We do have fora like the World Summit on the Information Society. So that's a forum that takes place every year, like the IGF takes place every year. And that is very much multi-stakeholder, where you have a range of stakeholders from around the world that come together and look at information society related issues linked to, how do we include everyone?
Yeah, your convening powers are really extremely important. And I know one of the things that you do is, and you did as the head of Development Bureau, was to do the Partnership to Connect. Can you talk a little bit about that, what it is and what it has accomplished and what you want to see it accomplish?
Yeah, there's much more to come, at least I hope so. So last year we had our World Telecommunications Development Conference, and I think in the build up to that conference and as a result of the pandemic and the fact that the whole world understood the importance of connectivity, and it was all of a sudden not something that was a nice to have, but a must have, that we had to look for new approaches, and we had to figure out how to close the gap faster. And of course the ITU has limited resources, but we need to do our part. And so what we did was we put together a coalition called Partner to Connect. We decided to focus on connecting people, empowering communities, and then adding value by developing digital ecosystems. And then this kind of cross-cutting piece was about incentivizing investments. And so working in a very open process, and some of you were part of the process as well, we developed an action framework of the needed steps to actually make this all happen in an empowering, inclusive way. We then went out with a pledging platform, and we said, okay, you want to be part of it, make a commitment, make a pledge, and we will hold you accountable. As of today, we have 730 pledges, and it amounts to about 30 billion US dollars. Doesn't come directly to the ITU. I wish it did. But it means that our pledgers will work with us or work directly with communities and countries to deliver on their pledges. We have a goal to get to 100 billion by the end of 2026, and the UNSG has confirmed that both verbally and in a policy brief. So I think it means we have to deliver. And there's a significant number of pledges in that process that are linked to women. Women and girls, and ways to close the digital gender gap and bring more women into our workforce.
And part of that is not just in currency, but also in-kind contribution. And people from some of these companies actually working, spending their time to help carry out their pledge. So that is very encouraging. And then you also do a lot of things to promote women in ICT. You have an ICT, Girls in ICT Day, or tell us a little bit about that, what that is, and that's at the time of UNGA, the UN General Assembly weeks in New York.
So we have a number of different activities where we focus on the digital gender gap. We have Girls in ICT Day, which has been celebrated now for 12 years, I think. It's celebrated on the fourth Thursday of the fourth month, so you can never say when it is unless you've nailed down the date for the year ahead. But it's an important celebration. It's a UN celebration where we look to countries, schools, the private sector to basically feature what could a career in the tech sector look like. And I think it's been very much appreciated. A lot of girls tell stories about coming to a workshop at the ITU or a workshop in Addis Ababa or a workshop at Facebook or a local school here in Washington. And I think those opportunities are important. Young girls need to see what career opportunities look like. We also have a number of coding programs, and I know you do as well. We have America's Girls Can Code. We have African Girls Can Code. I think those are also important opportunities. We have a Women in Cyber program. And so we really try to make sure we're trying to approach it from all different angles. We also have a global partnership, which is called Equals. We have over 100 partners from around the world where we're focused on the access divide, the skills divide, and then the leadership gap in the sector.
One of the things that's going on now that everybody is aware of is artificial intelligence and the conversations about that regarding generative AI, et cetera. And it's upending the way we all live, work, play, think. These technologies can go far to help reduce the amount of gender inequality, or they can exacerbate it. What is your vision for making AI a gender equality catalyst?
So we need more women in AI. I think that's the most important piece. We definitely need to get more girls interested in AI-related fields, and we need to get more women into the workforce because there's a huge gap. And some estimates say it's about 20%. I think it's probably much less, especially if we look to the developing world. And we look at the data and the bias, we're just going to exacerbate, as you said, the problems that we see in terms of inequalities today if we don't correct that. The ITU has been doing for the past 6 years a summit called Artificial Intelligence for Good. So we just concluded, I think very successfully, our AI for Good summit a couple of weeks ago. And we are trying to showcase the good stories about how you can use artificial intelligence to achieve each and every one of the Sustainable Development Goals including SDG 5. But this year's summit had a particular focus on generative AI, because everyone everywhere is talking about generative AI. And we were discussing the need for guardrails, safeguards, codes of conduct, regulation, enforcement. And I think there are a lot of discussions, including, of course, here in Washington and, of course, in the UN system. You know, what do we do? Do we create a new agency? Do we have some kind of global framework? I think we'll see. But what the ITU can do in that space is convene, as you said before, and I think we do a good job at convening, at exchanging practices and experiences, and I would say also in capacity development, and I think that's also where we can help in terms of women in AI to be much more focused in offering capacity development opportunities. We have some opportunities that we offer for women in aerospace, for example. And so if we can be more targeted in that space, I think that can help to make a difference.
Yeah, your AI for Good Summit also, I would add, featured a press conference with robots. Yes. How did that go?
So I mean, that's when the ITU actually made it into like every local TV network. Like, oh my God, we saw, the ITU press conference, and, I think it was quite incredible. It was fascinating and scary at the same time. Some of them are really interesting and human looking, and some others are kind of creepy. And some of them had different, interesting fashion taste, I would say, the way they were dressed. But what was interesting about this press conference, and it was the first ever humanoid, press conference, and the room was packed with journalists, and they were asking their questions, and the robots were responding. And of course, the one response that was picked up by the headlines around the globe was when the robot said that they could be better leaders than humans. But what was interesting was that in the course of the press conference, the robots were actually like talking to each other, which was like brought another element of interest or weirdness, but it was really fascinating. And I think, again, we need to get women as creators of these robots. We often talk at events when you have to wear the headset and you have the little pack thing. And if you make the mistake of wearing a dress and you can't put the thing on, well, I mean, if women were there creating the equipment, so again, I hope we get women out there helping to create the robots of the future.
How can the ITU and Vital Voices join forces to make the meaningful change that you're talking about? And I'm not necessarily referring to clothing, but nonetheless, although Diane von Furstenberg is a big supporter of Vital Voices, and maybe she needs to hear the conversation, but how can we be working together? What ideas do you have where we can be supportive of the important work that you're doing?
I think in many ways, definitely in our sector, we have this challenge of, there's a lot of stereotypes, but we have this challenge of like lack of role models. And I think you represent so many amazing women that would inspire women and men around the globe. And to the extent that your network could lend its voice to women in technologies, girls in technology, I think that would be incredibly helpful. I think mentoring opportunities, having these kinds of chats with young women, letting them see the opportunities out there, I think it would be tremendously helpful and very useful, and I think the kind of push we need to move the needle.
And of course, you travel all around the globe, particularly on development issues and the like. Perhaps we can coordinate with your team so that when you are in various places, we can make sure that you're aware of some of the members, the 20,000 members of our global leadership network who might be able to help you while you're on the ground. So that may be another way of engaging together. Now, this group is a very shy group that's assembled here. So I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask the ITU Secretary General. We have a microphone floating about, so please go ahead. Please raise your hand. We'll begin. And please, when you do ask your question, please identify yourself and your affiliation.
Thank you very much.
And stand so that you can be.
Thank you. Kathleen Doherty, a former State Department diplomat, ambassador, had a chance to work with you many years ago. Just actually, McKinsey just came out with a report today about AI and how the displacement, the greatest impact will be on women, because a lot of the customer service jobs are being held by women, and maybe about a million jobs will be lost in the next 5 years because of AI. So given the things you've already mentioned about women and technology and the digital divide, now we're going to have an AI divide between women. I'm curious about how you see yourself as a leader in ITU and also as a leader global to address some of these issues.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. And, you know, it is quite worrying when you look at AI and the labor force and what are the skills that we need for the future. We are, as a UN agency, working closely with ILO to try to figure out what are the kinds of skill sets we should be advocating to try to make sure that we don't exacerbate the divide. But I think it's a good point, and you know, I think we just need to do more to get women into the sector sooner rather than later, and to try to make sure that those skills of the future, the skills of tomorrow, are not just offered in developed countries, but also in developing countries.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rebecca McKinnon with the Wikimedia Foundation. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us, Doreen, and thanks to Susan for organizing this. My question relates to something you said earlier about a big barrier to participation by women and girls being harassment, threats, not feeling physically safe. And of course, this has led to a lot of policy proposals around online safety, as you know, adjacent to child safety as well, which are necessary. People need to be safe in order to participate, in order for us to have diversity and inclusion. But we quickly run up against human rights concerns, the need to ground safety measures and policies with protection of privacy, protection of the right to freedom of expression. And we've seen over the years that some of the member states in the ITU have somewhat weaponized the cause of online safety and child safety to serve the safety of the regime in power of the nation state. And I'm curious kind of how you think about navigating this tension where there are truly legitimate human rights-based reasons to have governance of online spaces, of technologies and standards that do keep human beings safe. At the same time, making sure that the approaches are sufficiently grounded in human rights standards, that we are not empowering the already very powerful to exercise more control in the name of protecting people. I'm curious about your thoughts about that as you lead change in the organization.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I mean, I think that I would answer it maybe in kind of different levels or layers. You know, when it comes to online protection, there's kind of the governmental perhaps piece, but there's also the personal piece. And I think that we do need to do more when it comes to educating newly connected or those that have been connected for a long time about how to best protect themselves. I think that's often a piece that could be a quick fix that we sometimes overlook. We have a child online protection program that we have had for a number of years. And we have guidelines, some have been developed by some of you, that focus on children, that focus on parents, that focus on educators, policymakers, and the tech sector. And we have translated those guidelines into numerous languages, and we do trainings in countries. And so I think that's one piece. The other piece, when it comes to human rights, and we like to say a rights-based approach, we have strengthened our cooperation with OHCHR, with the High Commissioner on Human Rights, who just came out with this report a week ago or 2 weeks ago on human rights and digital and standardization bodies. And actually a number of countries put that report forward to the ITU Council, which just concluded last Friday. And we have tried to strengthen our cooperation with other standards-making bodies, bringing in closely the High Commissioner, so that it can be understood from the beginning that you have to have a human rights lens when you're looking at standards-making processes. We're starting trainings for our study groups, for those of you who know what ITU study groups are, so that the chairs of those groups can actually have a better sense of the lens that they need to consider when we're rolling out standards-making processes, which I also think is important. And then I guess the last piece that we're following very closely is the future Global Digital Compact that's being discussed in the context of the UN system, that has a big piece in terms of digital cooperation and the Digital Compact on human rights.
So, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
So thank you very much. I'm Lina Galvez. I'm a member of the European Parliament, just passing through Washington. Thank you, Susan, and the Transatlantic Week for inviting me to be here. Well, I would like to share a concern and to know how you feel about it. I mean, since you have been involved in that world for many years, you have such an experience, and now such a great responsibility. You know, at the European Parliament, we have been working quite a lot in order to promote women on digital, girls on STEAM, on science and technology. And before that, I was a university professor, and I was even involved in an association for the promotion of women in science and technology. So I've been working for that many, many, many years. I would say more than 2 decades now. The figures are not good. I mean, we are not improving very much. But we have been working, so let's say, or we thought we were working in the right direction. So in the last year or so, I've been just thinking what we are doing wrong, or what it is missing. And I came to an idea I would like to share, is that we are, girls are becoming a bit schizophrenic, because on the one hand, we are saying then you have to jump on in science, in technology, you can't do it, that is your place. But on the other hand, we are sexualizing more and more girls. I mean, even through the digital world, so through all this social media, wherever, and it is, the image is something very different. So we are saying to them to be something very different on the one side and the other. And we are saying also then to pick up the studies that boys are picking up more naturally because they are socialized in these preferences or these choices. So we are saying to them, what you are picking up is not the right thing to do. So probably we are not empowering them, but the other way around. So it's just a concern I would like to share, because we are doing all this effort, but we are not having the results. So to what extent having the occupational segregation we have, and we really want to break, but instead of breaking it, it is increasing. To what extent we don't need to work equally also with boys. Telling them also that care sectors, wherever, are also good sector for them. So do you think we really need to work together also with boys, obviously, to improve labor conditions on this more female jobs and care sector, wherever, in order that we said, well, what you are choosing so far, girls, is also good. I mean, it's not only that. Because my impression is that we are not, I mean, for some of them, for some girls, it's working, but not for the majority. And probably we are not empowering them even when we are saying then, look, you need to jump into technology. So it's just a concern I have because I'm working so much for that. And we are not having results that I would like to listen
Lena, you're
to you.
you're absolutely right about that. And in fact, one of the things that Vital Voices does, we do a lot of work with men and with boys. Some of the women that we support in our leadership network actually employ young boys making jewelry to keep them off the streets and out of trouble. And that's been one of the programs we've highlighted, certainly, in our time. But do you have some thoughts about that, Doreen, how you get men and boys involved in the solutions?
I mean, it's a great comment, and I completely agree with you. We're not making enough progress, and maybe we're not taking the right approach. I definitely agree that we need to get boys involved, and maybe not just direct girls to science, but also help encourage boys into other fields as well. You know, in Geneva, we have the Gender Champions Network. It was launched in Geneva, and they have different chapters around the globe. And they started with an initial commitment, which was not to allow any more manels, and like no all male panels. And by the way, ITU has been, and there's the hashtag, right? We've been subject to that hashtag, even still like recently, where I think, oh my God, how could we have a manel? So there was this Gender Champions movement, which is still very active and I think very important. And in parallel, there's a Men Engaged network, which is initiated by the ambassador from the Netherlands, where he's brought together a bunch of men ambassadors in Geneva, and he's invited a few women on one of them to kind of be like advisors to them, to try to help them understand. So I think those kinds of efforts and initiatives, because we have to have men and women. If we're gonna make a difference, we have to work together and have men mentor women and women mentor men. And, you know, I think it's about finding balance, and it's about, you know, equality.
We have time, I think, for one more question. Go ahead, Kat.
Hi, Kat Duffy. I'm a senior fellow with the Digital Forensics Research Lab at the Atlantic Council. This follows a little bit on, I think, Rebecca's point, but as we have seen connectivity increase globally, right, and as we have seen the internet become a more and more fundamental function of how societies operate everywhere, I think that we've increasingly also seen a conflation of the architectural level of the internet and the global interoperability of the internet with this sort of application level, level of the World Wide Web, right? And what application level approaches are doing to societal structures. And that's where a lot of these safety arguments tend to come into play as well. And so we have, I think, increasingly seen attacks on the concept of a global and free and interoperable internet on the grounds that we need a safer application layer. Do you feel like the difference between those things is sort of adequately understood right now for the policy conversations we need to be having, the solutions that we need to be crafting?
Anybody else want to take that question? I would say probably it's not entirely understood. I mean, I think that's probably you know, an easy answer. But I do think that we need to continue to advocate for, and we have an IGF leadership panel member in the room. We do need to advocate more for a free, open, trusted internet. We do need to avoid internet fragmentation, as we have seen hints in the past. And at the same time, when it comes to the application layer, I think we need to do more so that that's not a barrier to fragment the internet, as you were hinting. But I also wanted to say, when you mentioned applications, I was thinking, there's so many applications, so to speak, that can really be life-changing when it comes to women. And I was thinking digital finance, for example. I mean, we have seen how access to digital finance for women, and there's so many great studies with great statistics that it's so clear. I mean, the economic case and argument to close the digital gender gap and to empower women by access to life-changing applications and services is just huge.
Yeah, and absolutely. The financial side of things is an area that we can really get our arms around and do a lot more with. So you're totally on point with that. I think we are just about out of time, but I wanted to ask you if there was anything that we did not cover today that you would like to mention before we wrap up.
Maybe one piece, which is coming to my kind of personal story. So I'm a mom, and I have 4 children, all of which are in university. And I say this because I think it's really important when we look at empowering, encouraging, and inspiring women, that we remind each other that yes, you can be a parent, and yes, you will have to make certain choices throughout your journey. But it's important that workspaces recognize that women may have demands that men don't necessarily have, and workspaces and workforces have to be understanding to that. And I guess that's something that it's a high priority for me as Secretary General. We've just adopted this new parental leave policy, which I hope makes things better for women. But a lot of it has to do with what I went through when my children were small, and I can tell you that was not easy at all. And sometimes it's still a challenge, but those kinds of challenges are real, especially for women. And I think we can learn a lot from each other to be more supportive and to make sure that encouraging, enabling policies are in place so that we don't have this leaky pipeline syndrome that we just can't seem to fix.
That's hugely important, and I suspect that there are quite a number of people sitting in this room who have their own personal experiences with trying to work in an environment that does not recognize some of the problems that take place. Any last message for Vital Voices and the folks that are both online and gathered here?
Join us. Let's partner, because I do think this is one of those moments where we need all hands on deck. So, join us. We'd love to work with you, and I think it's good for the world if we can bridge that digital gender gap. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our 2 host law firms, Hogan Lovells and Wilkinson Barker Nauer, for their support of Vital Voices, which is so fundamental for us. I also want to thank our Vital Voices team, which is scattered around the room, which has done a terrific job to help bring this event to fruition. And I encourage everybody, first of all, I think we have a buffet of some sort or some food in the back, as well as drinks. And please take some time to walk through our building and enjoy the spirit that it represents. So thank you all for coming today, and have a great time networking.